3 years ago, they told him he'd never amount to anything. Tonight, they have no idea what's about to walk through that door.
She humiliated him in front of everyone once. Tonight, fate is about to return the favor.
"You look comfortable," she said, not knowing he was about to be worth more than everyone in that room combined. One notification, one number, and in 3 seconds, the entire room realized who they were laughing at.
He didn't need revenge. He just needed her to finally see the man she walked away from.
If you have ever been told you would never amount to anything by the one person who was supposed to believe in you the most, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what happens at that reunion will remind you that karma does not need your help. It just needs time. If this story moves you, hit like and subscribe right now, because we tell true-to-life stories like this every single week, and you will not want to miss what's coming next. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom parking lot, staring at his own reflection in the tinted window of a car he had borrowed from his assistant, because his own vehicle, a plain gray sedan, felt too ordinary for the night ahead. He was 37 years old, broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair that had just started graying at the temples, pale blue eyes that always looked a little tired, and the kind of quiet, unassuming face that made people underestimate him. He wore a simple navy blazer over a white shirt, no tie, sleeves that fit just a little too loose, because he had lost weight over the last 3 years, from stress no one else knew about. In his hand, he held a small folded piece of paper, a note his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had drawn for him that morning. A stick figure of a man in a suit standing next to a rocket ship with the words, "Good luck, Daddy. You already won," scrawled in purple crayon. An hour earlier, Ethan had knelt on the kitchen floor of his rented house, tying Lily's shoelaces even though she insisted, at 8 years old, that she could absolutely do it herself. His mother, Diane, a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the yaculous hands of someone who had worked as a school cafeteria manager for 30 years, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching her son with the particular worry only a mother carries. "You don't have to prove anything to those people tonight," Diane had said. "You never did." Ethan had only nodded, because he knew she was partly right and partly wrong. He did not need to prove anything to Vanessa, but he had spent 3 years needing to prove something to himself, and tonight, whether he admitted it or not, was the final exam. Diane had been the one who quietly remortgaged her modest 2-bedroom home during the worst month of Northline's history, when payroll for 4 employees was due, and the company's Weathers account held less than $3,000, and she had never once brought it up again, not even when Ethan tried, twice, to repay her early. "Family isn't a loan," she told him both times. "Put it back into the company, or into that little girl's future." Lily had hugged her father's leg before he left, pressed the crayon drawing into his hand, and told him, with the total confidence only a child can offer, "You don't need to win, Daddy. You already did the hard part." Ethan had driven the first 10 minutes to the reunion, with that sentence echoing louder in his ear than anything Vanessa could possibly say to him that night. 3 years ago, Ethan had walked out of a courtroom with nothing but partial custody of his daughter, and a storage unit full of prototype servers that everyone, including his own family, told him to sell for scrap. His wife at the time, Vanessa Marsh, had made her feelings very clear in front of the judge, in front of both their families, and eventually in front of half of their college friend group on social media. She had called him a dreamer who mistook stubbornness for ambition. She said their marriage collapsed because Ethan spent more nights sleeping next to a server rack in a rented garage than he did next to her. And when the divorce was finalized, she took the house, the savings, and most of their friends' sympathy, while Ethan quietly signed away almost everything just to keep seeing Lily every other weekend without a fight. Tonight was the Westbrook High 10-year reunion, and Ethan almost did not come. It was his best friend, and now Chief Operating Officer, Marcus Webb, who convinced him. Marcus was a tall, broad-chested black man with a shaved head and an easy laugh, the kind of person who could calm a room just by walking into it. He had been there in the garage with Ethan during the worst of it, living on instant noodles and unpaid invoices, believing in an idea when literally nobody else did. You don't owe anyone an explanation, Marcus had told him over the phone the night before. But you've spent 3 years hiding like you did something wrong. Let them see you. Let them see who you actually are now. Who Ethan actually was now. Almost nobody in that ballroom would recognize. 18 months earlier, his company, Northline Systems, had cracked a logistics routing algorithm that cut warehouse fulfillment costs by nearly a third for any retailer that adopted it. 6 months ago, a consortium led by one of the largest e-commerce companies in the world had made an acquisition offer that Ethan, after brutal, sleepless negotiation, had turned into a licensing and equity partnership instead of an outright sale. A decision that would prove, within days of this very reunion, to be the difference between being comfortably rich and becoming a billionaire. But Ethan had told almost no one. He'd kept his name off press releases whenever he could, let Marcus be the public face of the company, and lived in the same modest 3-bedroom house near Lily's school that he'd rented right after the divorce. He was not hiding out of shame. He was hiding because he had learned, the hardest way possible, what it felt like to be loved for what you might become instead of who you actually were. And he was terrified of ever confusing the two again. Inside the ballroom, string lights hung in loose loops across the ceiling, and a banner reading Westbrook High, 10 years later, stretched crookedly above a half-empty dessert table. Ethan spotted familiar faces immediately. Priya Anand, who had been valedictorian and was now a pediatric surgeon, laughing near the bar. Danny Ruiz, the old football captain, now visibly working on his second beer belly, telling an exaggerated story to anyone who would listen. And Sophie Kane, the reunion's chirpy organizer, clipboard in hand, checking names off a list with the seriousness of an air traffic controller. And then he saw her. Vanessa stood near the center of the room in a fitted crimson dress that clung to every curve, her dark hair falling in loose waves over one shoulder, gold hoops catching the light every time she tilted her head to laugh. She was, without question, still the most striking person in the room, and she knew it. Beside her stood a tall man in an expensive-looking charcoal suit, his hair slicked back, a watch on his wrist that he made sure caught the light whenever he raised his glass. This was Richard Hale, her husband of just under 2 years, a man who introduced himself to literally everyone as in private equity, without ever specifying which firm, which deals, or which decade his last real success had happened in. Ethan tried to slip along the far wall toward Marcus and Marcus's wife, hoping to disappear into small talk about mortgage rates and youth soccer leagues. It almost worked. He had nearly reached the drinks table when Vanessa's voice cut across the room, bright and performative, the voice she used when she wanted an entire audience. Ethan? Oh my God. Ethan Cole, is that actually you? Every conversation within 15 feet seemed to pause, the way conversations do when they sense a story about to happen. Vanessa crossed the room with Richard trailing slightly behind her, looking Ethan up and down with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and pity. Wow, she said, reaching out to touch the sleeve of his blazer between 2 fingers, like she was checking the fabric at a discount store. You look, she paused for effect, comfortable. I'm so glad you're doing okay. I always worried about you after everything. She said everything, the way people say a word they want to sound generous about, but secretly relish. I'm doing fine, Vanessa, Ethan said evenly. Good to see you. This is my husband, Richard, she said, pulling him forward by the arm like a prize. Richard, this is Ethan, my ex, the one I told you about, the garage guy. A small ripple of laughter moved through 2 or 3 people standing nearby, who clearly remembered the divorce gossip well. Richard extended a hand with a firm, showy grip. Garage guy, huh? Still tinkering? His smile had teeth in it. Something like that, Ethan said simply. Vanessa's eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, to Ethan's shoes. Plain, well-worn leather loafers, then to his blazer, then back up to his face, cataloging him the way she used to when they were married, and money was tight, when every third fashionable choice he made felt to her like evidence of a life she was being forced to live. You know, she said, lowering her voice into something that was meant to sound sympathetic, but landed as cruelty. I always tell people, Richard and I are just so blessed. We just got back from Lake Como. Richard's fund had an incredible year. It's a completely different life, you know? I sometimes forget what it was like, living paycheck to paycheck, wondering if the lights would stay on. She laughed lightly, glancing at the small group that had gathered. God, remember that, Ethan? Ramen for dinner for, what, 8 months straight? Marcus, standing a few feet away, stiffened, ready to step in. But Ethan gave him the smallest shake of his head. He had learned patience from Lily, who could sit for 20 minutes trying to stack blocks that kept falling, never once raising her voice at the tower. I remember, Ethan said quietly. I remember a lot of things. I just hope things have stabilized for you, Vanessa continued, unable to resist one more layer. Custody arrangements, the whole single dad thing. It must be exhausting doing that on whatever you're doing now for work. She smiled at Richard, who chuckled along, sipping his champagne. Sophie Kane, sensing the temperature of the room shifting into something uncomfortable, hurried over with her clipboard, trying to redirect. Ethan, we didn't put your company on the reunion bio cards. You never sent one in. What are you up to these days? It was an innocent question, but it landed in the room like a spark near dry grass. Vanessa's smile sharpened, waiting, almost hungry, for whatever small, forgettable answer Ethan was about to give, so she could feel, one more time, that leaving him had been the smartest decision of her life. Before Ethan could answer, Richard's phone buzzed loudly in his pocket, and out of habit he glanced at it, then froze. His face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the dim ballroom lighting. Sorry, he muttered, stepping back, thumbs scrolling frantically. Vanessa noticed but brushed it off, too focused on her moment with Ethan to care. I run a company called Northline Systems, Ethan said finally, plainly. No performance in his voice at all. We build logistics software. Cute, Vanessa said, patting his arm again. Software's a tough business, isn't it? So many little startups fail. I hope it's paying the bills, at least for Lily's sake. It was at that exact moment that a man in his 50s, silver-haired, wearing a reunion name tag that read, Frank Delgado, class parent volunteer, approached with his phone held out, visibly starstruck, elbowing through the small crowd. I am so sorry to interrupt, Frank said, but are you Ethan Cole? Northline Systems? I just saw the alert. You're all over the financial news right now. The partnership deal, the equity stake valuation, it just got confirmed after the market close. They're saying you're worth. He glanced at his phone screen again, almost laughing in disbelief. They're saying you just crossed $1.2 billion. My son works in venture capital. He's been talking about you for a year. Can I get a picture? This is unbelievable. You're actually here. The ballroom did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a wave pulls back before it crashes. A few heads turning, then more, then Sophie's clipboard slowly lowering, then Danny Ruiz nearly choking on his beer, then finally, unavoidably, Vanessa's face, caught between the fading remains of her smile and something collapsing underneath it. I'm sorry, Vanessa said, a laugh escaping that had no humor left in it. Billion? That has to be a mistake. That's not. Ethan builds software in a garage. Built, Ethan corrected gently. No triumph in his voice, only tiredness. Past tense. We moved out of the garage about 2 years ago. Richard had gone very quiet, staring at his own phone as though it had betrayed him personally. Because in a sense, it had. A notification from his fund's investor portal. A margin call on a leveraged position that had nothing to do with Ethan at all, but suddenly, standing in this exact spot, felt like the cruelest possible timing. He had spent 2 years telling Vanessa and everyone else about the fund's incredible year, while quietly bleeding money on a bad bet, propping up appearances with Vanessa's Brenier's remaining divorce settlement, and a rapidly maxing line of credit. Watching a dozen phones turn toward Ethan at once was, for Richard, like watching his own carefully built stage set catch fire. Marcus stepped up beside Ethan, clapping a hand on his shoulder, grinning the grin of a man who had earned the right to enjoy this moment, even if his friend refused to. Yeah, he builds a little bit of everything, Marcus said to Frank, shaking his hand warmly. Glad to meet a fan. Vanessa reached out, almost automatically, and touched Ethan's arm again, except this time her fingers lingered, her voice dropping into something softer, something that sounded almost like the girl he had married a lifetime ago. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If I had known." "If you had known what?" Ethan asked, not unkindly, but not softly either. "You would have stayed? You would have believed in it before it worked, instead of after?" He shook his head slowly. "That's the thing, Vanessa. I needed you to believe in me when I was eating ramen in a garage. Not now." Grace Whitman, Northline's chief operating partner for the East Coast office and, over the last 8 months, quietly, the first person Ethan had let himself trust with his heart again, appeared at his side, having just arrived from the valet with 2 glasses of water in her hands, one of which she offered to Ethan without a word. She was tall, dark-haired, dressed simply in a forest green dress, with the kind of calm, steady presence that never needed to compete for a room's attention. She did not know the whole history standing in front of her, but she understood immediately from the tightness in Ethan's jaw exactly what kind of night this was. She slid her free hand into his, not for show, but because that is what you do for someone you love, when the ground beneath them is shifting. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I will be," Ethan said, and for the first time all night, he meant it completely. Vanessa watched the small, unremarkable gesture, a hand in a hand, and something in her chest ached in a way she did not expect and did not welcome. She had spent 3 years telling herself and everyone around her a very tidy story, that she had left a man with no future for the sake of stability, and that story had made her feel wise, even righteous. Standing here now, she understood that the story had simply been wrong, not because Ethan had gotten lucky, but because she had never once asked what he was actually building, only what he currently had. She had measured him by his bank balance at the exact wrong moment and missed, completely, the only thing that had ever actually mattered, the stubborn, quiet, unglamorous discipline of a man who kept showing up, kept working, kept loving his daughter, through failure after failure, until failure finally ran out of ways to stop him. The rest of the reunion blurred past in fragments. Richard left early, citing a work call, though 2 people later swore they saw him arguing on the phone in the parking lot, his voice tight with something closer to panic than business. Frank Delgado got his photo, and apparently, texted it to his son within minutes, because Ethan's phone began buzzing with LinkedIn connection requests before he'd stoles. Which even left the building. Priya, the pediatric surgeon, came over to congratulate him, genuinely, and to ask, just as genuinely, how Lily was doing, one of the only people in the room who remembered his daughter's name without prompting. Danny Ruiz asked, with total sincerity and zero shame, whether Northline was hiring for anything, and Marcus, laughing, actually took his number. Vanessa found Ethan once more near the exit, alone for a moment, while Marcus fetched the car, and Grace stepped away to take a call. "Can we talk?" "Just for a second," she said. Her performance had drained out of her completely. What was left looked almost young, almost like the 22-year-old he had married in a courthouse with borrowed rings. "There's nothing to fight about anymore, Vanessa," Ethan said. "We don't have to be enemies. Lily needs both of us calm, both of us kind. That's the only thing I actually want from you now. I said terrible things tonight. I've said terrible things for 3 years," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "I told myself I was protecting myself by leaving, and maybe some of that was true. But I also punished you for not being finished yet. I judged the middle of your story like it was the end." Ethan considered this for a long moment. He thought about the storage unit full of servers everyone told him to sell, about 8 months of instant ramen, about the note in his pocket with a crayon rocket ship on it. "The middle is the only part that actually costs you anything," he said finally. "Anyone can be gracious about the ending. I just wish—" He stopped himself, decided the sentence wasn't worth finishing, and instead said only, "Take care of yourself, Vanessa. I mean that." He walked out into the cool night air, with Grace's hand finding his again at the curb, Marcus already pulling the car around, laughing about something with the valet. Above them, the parking lot lights buzzed faintly, and somewhere past the hotel, the city skyline glittered the way it always had, indifferent to who in that ballroom had won or lost anything at all. In the months that followed, Vanessa and Richards marriage, did not survive the quiet unraveling that began that night in the ballroom. Richard's fund folded within the year, and Vanessa, to her credit, chose not to chase Ethan's money through another courtroom battle, something Marcus predicted she might try, and something Ethan quietly hoped, for Lily's sake, she wouldn't. Instead, she found a small apartment, took a job at a marketing firm downtown, and slowly, awkwardly, rebuilt a version of herself that was not measured by a husband's bank balance. She and Ethan settled into an uneasy but workable rhythm of school pickups and shared birthdays. Two people who had once loved each other learning, late and imperfectly, how to co-parent with something like respect. It was not a fairy tale reconciliation, and Ethan never pretended it needed to be one. Some chapters simply close, and the healthiest thing two people can do is let them. 2 years later, Ethan would tell this story only once, at Lily's 10th birthday party, to a small circle of people who actually mattered to him. His mother Diane, who had mortgaged her own small house years earlier to help him make payroll one brutal month, and never once asked for it back. Marcus, now a father himself, and still Ethan's closest friend, and Grace, who by then wore a ring on her left hand that Ethan had designed himself, refusing to buy anything he hadn't put real thought into. Lily, older now, gap-toothed and fearless, would ask why the story mattered so much to him, and Ethan would tell her the only honest answer he had. "It's not about the money, sweetheart," he'd say. "Money's just numbers. It's about the year everyone told me to quit, and I didn't. Even though nobody was watching. Even though nobody believed me. That's the part I'm proud of. The $1 billion was just proof, way after the fact, of a decision I'd already made when it looked like the stupidest decision in the world. And that, more than any headline, any reunion, any stunned billionaire reveal in a crowded ballroom, was the real ending of Ethan Cole's story. Not a triumphant return to the people who doubted him, but the quiet, unglamorous discipline of a man who decided, long before anyone was clapping, that he was worth believing in." If this story reminded you of your own middle chapter, the one nobody claps for yet, hold on to it. Keep showing up. The people who mock you today are often just narrating a story they haven't finished reading. And if you enjoyed this journey with Ethan, make sure you're subscribed, because next week's story might just be the one that changes how you see your own life.